It's pretty striking, isn't it? David Hume, this huge figure in philosophy, his friends called him Saint David, the good David.
Yeah, quite affectionate terms.
But then his critics, the great infidel, that kind of contrast just screams that we're diving into something complex today.
Definitely. We're looking at Hume's views on religion, his religious thought. He lived 1711 to 1776, for context.
And we've got a bunch of his writings, interpretations. The goal here is to really boil it down for you.
Exactly. Think of it as your fast track to understanding why Hume was such a challenge to the religious beliefs of his time.
Right. A shortcut to a really influential thinker. We're going to unpack how he questioned, the basic justifications people give.
Things like revealed theology miracles, scripture, but also natural theology, arguing from nature to God.
And even the idea that religion is just, well, good for society or individuals, the pragmatic angle.
Yeah. And fundamentally, Hume was trying to systematically chip away at the foundations supporting religious belief. It was a huge undertaking.
Okay, so where did he start? Where do we see these ideas cropping up first?
Well, his writings on religion are pretty extensive, and they definitely caused controversy. Even in his first big work, A Treatise of Human Nature, you can see the beginnings. He talks about the soul, develops a moral system that doesn't, rely on God's commands.
So the groundwork was there early on.
Absolutely. Then in the Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, he revisits some things, but that's where you get the really famous arguments against miracles.
Right, the miracle section. Very famous.
And he also questions how useful theology even is as speculation. His key thing is always, stick with consistent experience, don't jump to extraordinary claims.
But he wasn't just writing these dense philosophical books, was he? I remember something about history.
Not at all. His history of England was massive, a huge success. And in it, he often looks at religious groups, religious conflict, and he analyzes them by their consequences, which, let's be honest, were often pretty negative, lots of conflict. Plus, he wrote essays tackling specific things, like of the immortality of the soul, of suicide. Pretty provocative stuff, challenging core doctrines.
Yeah, those titles alone sound challenging.
And others criticizing organized religion, like of superstition and enthusiasm, or clergy of national characters.
So hitting it from multiple angles, but then there are books focused entirely on religion, too.
Exactly. Two main ones. The Natural History of Religion, published during his life.
Okay.
And the Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. That one he worked on for decades, kept revising, and specifically arranged for it to be published only after he died.
Wow. Decades. That tells you something. What was the natural history about?
Well, in the intro, Hume makes this really important split, because you can look at religion in two ways. Its rational basis, the arguments for it.
Right.
Or you can explore its origins in human nature. How did it even start?
Okay, so two different questions.
Precisely. The Dialogues tackles the first one, the arguments. The natural history tackles the second. Why do people believe this stuff? He looks at emotions, psychology.
Interesting, like a psychological explanation.
Yeah, he talks about how fear, ignorance of causes, this tendency to see agency everywhere might lead to what he calls common or false religion.
So, like early humans trying to explain storms or something.
Exactly that kind of thing. It's a mix of philosophy, psychology, history, trying to give a natural explanation for why religions pop up everywhere.
And the Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, published posthumously, revised for years, sounds like a major work.
Oh, absolutely. It's considered a cornerstone of philosophy of religion, a deep dive into natural theology arguing for God based on reason and observation of the world.
How's it structured?
It's a conversation. Three main characters, Philo, the skeptic, Demea, who's more like a traditional Orthodox believer, and Cleanthes, who takes a more philosophical, empirical approach to theology.
And someone narrates it.
Yeah, Pamphilus, who's supposed to be Cleanthes' student.
So these different voices let him explore the arguments from different perspectives. But is it clear who Hume agrees with?
That's the million-dollar question. It's notoriously difficult. Hume's style, especially here, is very subtle, very ironic.
Like Plato's dialogues.
A bit like Cicero, actually, whom he admired. No single character just wins. Everyone makes points. It forces you, the reader, to think. Plus the irony. It's thick sometimes.
Okay, so we have Philo the skeptic, Demea the orthodox guy, Cleanthes the philosophical theist, who usually gets tagged as Hume's stand-in.
The general consensus, though people definitely argue about it, is that Philo, the skeptic, often represents Hume's own views.
Why Philo?
Well, he gets the most airtime, for one. Many of his arguments kind of hang in the air unanswered. And a lot of what Philo says about religion or even other philosophical stuff like cause and effect, it lines up pretty well with things Hume wrote elsewhere, like causality being about habit, not necessity.
Okay, that makes sense. But I've heard about this thing called Philo's reversal near the end. What's that about? It sounds like Philo changes his tune.
It's a really tricky part. Yeah, after spending most of the book tearing down the design argument, Philo suddenly seems to concede. Something like, look, a purpose, a design, it hits you everywhere. Even the dimmest person sees it.
So what gives?
Big debate. Was Philo being genuine? Was Hume himself softening his stance late in life? Or was it just a rhetorical move within the dialogue, maybe for balance, maybe ironic?
So lots of interpretation needed there. Given all this, the different voices, the reversal, where do scholars generally land on Hume's actual beliefs?
Well, given how much he criticized traditional religion, pretty much everyone agrees he wasn't a standard believer.
Right. Seems obvious.
Beyond that, you get roughly three main camps: atheistic naturalism, skeptical agnosticism, and some kind of deism.
Okay, atheism first. He just didn't believe in God or the supernatural.
That's the view, yeah. So it's maybe more common outside academic philosophy. But the tricky part is, Hume himself was always very cautious about making big metaphysical claims, like nothing supernatural exists.
Why? How does that conflict?
Because saying God definitely doesn't exist is itself a strong metaphysical statement. Hume was usually more focused on the limits of our knowledge. What can we know? What can we justify believing? Claiming certainty about non-existence might go beyond what he thought we could justify.
Okay, so that leads to the second view, skeptical agnosticism.
Exactly. This suggests Hume doubted the supernatural, probably lived his life as if it didn't exist, but stopped short of definitively saying it couldn't exist. He's skeptical, but acknowledges the limits of reason.
So, functionally atheist, perhaps, but philosophically agnostic about absolute certainty.
That's a good way to put it. It fits his general philosophical caution.
But then there's deism. Some people think he did believe in some kind of creator. Why?
This often circles back to Philo's reversal.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't totally ironic. Some argue Hume was aiming for like a dramatic balance in the dialogues.
To make the reader think harder.
Perhaps. Or maybe Hume thought there's a sort of natural, non-rational inclination to see design, even if the logical arguments for it are weak.
An inclination, like a feeling.
Something like that. And there are other scattered passages in his works that some people read as pointing towards a kind of minimal deism.
Minimal in what sense? Like not the traditional God?
Very minimal. Sometimes called attenuated deism. The connection between this designer and human intelligence would be super weak. Very remote.
Right.
And crucially, this view usually rejects any idea of a morally involved God. The problem of evil, which we'll get to, makes that really difficult for Hume.
Right.
But even among those who see him as a deist, they disagree. Why? Was it a weak argument from nature? Or just this vague inclination? Either way, it's a deism that definitely rejects miracles, revelation, that sort of thing.
Speaking of miracles, Hume's attack on them is probably one of his most famous contributions, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a cornerstone of his critique. He tackles it head-on in the inquiry. It's a direct shot at revealed theology.
How does he approach it?
It's basically a two-part argument. First, a general kind of in-principle argument against ever believing a miracle report. Second, 4 specific reasons why actual miracle testimonies we encounter are unreliable.
The core idea being?
Prioritize consistent experience. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and miracle claims are about as extraordinary as it gets.
Okay, so what's the in-principle argument, the categorical one?
He starts by talking about how we form beliefs based on evidence. Some things are proofs backed by truly uniform experience. The sun rising, gravity,
Constant conjunction.
Right. Other things are probabilities based on evidence that's mostly consistent, but not always. Now, a miracle, by definition, is a violation of a law of nature.
Something that goes against that uniform experience.
Exactly. So the evidence for the law of nature, all past uniform experience, is, by definition, the strongest possible evidence you can have. Any testimony for the miracle is automatically pitted against this mountain of evidence.
So the testimony would have to be incredibly, incredibly strong.
So strong, Hume argues, that the falsehood of the testimony would have to be even more miraculous than the miracle itself, which is a pretty high bar.
Yeah, it sounds almost impossible to meet. Now, I remember hearing critics say Hume just defined miracles out of existence. Is that fair?
That's the caricature argument, and it kind of misses the point. Hume isn't necessarily saying miracles are logically impossible or can never happen. His argument is epistemic. It's about belief and justification. He's saying, given the nature of evidence and experience, we are never justified in believing a miracle report. It's about rational belief, not metaphysical possibility.
Gotcha. It's about what we should believe, based on evidence. So what are the 4 specific evidential arguments? Why are testimonies usually weak?
Okay, first, he says basically throughout history, you just don't find miracles attested to by enough really credible witnesses. People who are educated, smart, unbiased, with nothing to gain, and whose reputation is on the line.
The quality of witnesses is lacking.
Second, human psychology. We love surprises. We get a kick out of wonder and the extraordinary. This makes us, kind of prone to believing and spreading amazing stories, even if the evidence is shaky.
That still feels true today, doesn't it?
It really does. Third point, miracle stories tend to come from, as he put it, ignorant and barbarous nations.
Ooh, a bit harsh sounding now.
Yeah, the languages of its time. But his point is that in places where science and natural explanations aren't well understood, miracles seem like a handy explanation for things. As science progresses, miracle claims tend to decrease.
Okay, makes sense. And the 4th one, that always seemed a bit more complex.
The 4th one is about competing religions. He argues that the miracles claimed by one religion inherently undermine the miracles claimed by other religions.
How so?
Because each set of miracles is supposed to establish the truth of its specific religious system. So if a Catholic miracle proves Catholicism, it implicitly disproves the miracle claims supporting, say, Islam or Hinduism, and vice versa.
They cancel each other out in a way.
Yeah, the evidence is contradictory. He basically says believers are often quite skeptical about other religions' miracles, and they should apply that same skepticism to their own intellectual consistency.
Okay, so that's a pretty robust challenge to revealed religion. Then he moves on to natural theology, specifically the design argument. Big target for him.
Huge target. He hits it from multiple angles. In the dialogues, Philo just unleashes this barrage of specific objections against the argument itself. The whole universe is like a machine analogy.
Right, the watchmaker analogy is the classic version.
Exactly. Then, in the inquiry, Hume offers a more general critique about whether this kind of reasoning from effect, the world to cause, God, is even valid or useful in the first place.
The core problem being?
Comparing the universe to a human-made object, like a watch or a house, is just a fundamentally flawed analogy. They're too different.
Let's break down Philo's specific objections in the dialogues. You said there were categories, concerns about the conclusion.
Right. First, the scope of the conclusion. Philo says, okay, if you're using an analogy from our limited experience, your conclusion about the designer has to be limited too.
How so?
Well, we experience a finite world, so why infer an infinite creator? We experience a material world, so why infer an immaterial creator? Our experience is brief, why infer an eternal one?
Good point.
He even says, look at complex human projects, big buildings. Ships, they often have multiple designers or builders. So why infer just one creator for the universe? The analogy doesn't force that.
So the argument, even if it worked, doesn't get you to the traditional infinite single God.
Exactly. It leads to a really vague, fuzzy concept of a designer, at best.
Okay, what about the analogy itself being weak?
Philo points out huge differences. We know the purpose of a watch to tell time. What's the purpose of the entire universe? It's not obvious. Assigning one usually involves sneaking in religious assumptions.
Right.
Plus, the more we learn about nature, the less it looks like a machine. Think about biology, self-replication, growth, adaptation. That's not how machines work. The disanalogies are massive.
So even superficial similarities hide deeper differences.
Precisely. Then there are problems with drawing the inference at all. Philo notes we see order arising naturally all the time. An acorn becomes an oak tree. No conscious designer needed for that process.
Order doesn't automatically mean design.
Right. If order can happen naturally, you can't just leap from the universe has order to it must have a designer. Also, the universe's creation, if it happened, was a unique, one-off event.
Yeah.
Well, Hume's whole idea of causation relies on observing repeated conjunctions of events. We can't observe multiple universes being created to see if they always involve designers. So inferring a cause for this unique event is super speculative.
Okay, that's a deep cut into his own theory of causation. What if we just grant the inference, though? Say, okay, maybe there was a designer. Are there still problems?
Philo says yes. Even if you grant the inference, why privilege reason or intelligence as the designing principle? We also see order arising from instinct, generation, like plants and animals, even vegetation. Why not infer the universe grew like a giant vegetable?
Okay, I see the point.
And the classic problem. If the designer needs explaining because it's complex and ordered, then what designed the designer? You get an infinite regress.
Unless you just stop somewhere.
Right. But if you're willing to stop and say the first designer is just unexplained or uncaused, why not just stop earlier and say the universe itself is the unexplained, uncaused thing? It's simpler. Occam's razor, basically.
Oh. Okay, that's a thorough takedown. What about the inference problem from the inquiry? How is that different?
It's broader. It questions the whole project of inferring God's attributes from the world and then trying to use that inferred God to deduce new things about the world, like future events or moral duties.
How does that work?
Hume says, look, the universe's creation is unique. You infer the cause, God, only from the effect, the universe as it is. Your idea of the cause can't contain more than what you found in the effect.
So you can't add attributes to God that aren't strictly justified by the evidence in the world.
Exactly. And once you've made that inference based on all the evidence in the universe, you can't then turn around and use your inferred concept of God to predict new facts about the universe or claim special knowledge that wasn't already part of the initial evidence base.
Like trying to predict the baker's skill with bread just from seeing one cake they made?
That's a great analogy. You infer from the one effect. You can't then reliably deduce other different effects from that inferred cause. It limits what natural theology can actually achieve.
Okay, that really clarifies the limits. Now, Hume also addresses the cosmological argument, arguing from the universe's existence or contingency back to a necessary first cause, God.
He does, though he doesn't always separate it clearly from what we now call the ontological argument. He often lumps them as arguments a priori.
Arguments based purely on reason, not experience.
Right. For Hume, the key link is they both try to prove the existence of a necessary being through reason alone.
And Hume's take on necessary being.
He thinks the very idea is incoherent, fundamentally flawed.
Why?
He argues we can always conceive of anything not existing without any logical contradiction. Existence, for Hume, isn't a property that something possesses necessarily, like a triangle necessarily having three sides. You can think of a triangle not existing. You can think of God not existing.
So you can't prove existence just by defining something.
Precisely. Even Cleanthes in the Dialogues, who defends the design argument, which is based on experience, totally rejects Demia's a priori cosmological argument.
What are Cleanthes' objections? Or Hume's voiced through him?
First, it's just the wrong type of argument. Claims about what exists in the world, matters of fact, can only be known through experience, not pure logic. You can always imagine the opposite of any matter of fact without it being a logical impossibility.
So God exists is a matter-of-fact claim, not a logical truth.
Exactly. Hume famously said, the non-existence of any being, without exception, is as clear and distinct an idea as its existence. No contradiction in imagining something doesn't exist.
Okay, what else?
Even if you grant, for argument's sake, that there must be a first cause or a necessary being, why assume it's the God of traditional theism?
The identification problem again.
Right. Philo jumps in here too, saying, why not just say the material universe itself is the necessary being? It avoids adding extra entities.
Simpler explanation.
And Cleanthes also questions the premise that an infinite regress of causes is impossible. He suggests maybe a chain of explained causes going back infinitely doesn't actually need a separate explanation for the whole chain.
That's counterintuitive.
It is, but it challenges a core assumption of many cosmological arguments. So, for Hume, existence claims need empirical grounding arguments from cause or effect based on experience. A priori proofs are out.
Okay, so he's dismantled revealed theology via miracles and natural theology via design and cosmological arguments. But then there's the problem of evil. That feels different, more direct, maybe.
Absolutely. Hume thought this was a massive challenge, possibly the most powerful one against a good, all-powerful God. He spends a lot of time on it in the Dialogues, parts X and X line.
He looks at both the logical and evidential versions?
Yes. The logical version basically says, if God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good, then evil should not exist. Since evil does exist, such a God must not exist. It's presented as a logical contradiction.
The classic Epicurean dilemma.
Pretty much, Philo lays it out. But then, interestingly, Philo sort of concedes that maybe, just maybe, there's some way to logically square the existence of some evil with God's existence. This shifts the focus.
Shifts it to the evidential problem.
Exactly. The evidential argument says, okay, maybe some evil is logically possible, but look at the sheer amount and types of horrific suffering in the world. Is this really compatible with a perfectly good, all-powerful creator? Is this the world we'd expect?
Right. It seems highly improbable.
Hume uses these thought experiments. Imagine a stranger just seeing all the misery or seeing a badly built house and being told the architect is perfect. The evidence of the world seems to strongly count against such a creator.
And his answer is clearly no, this isn't what we'd expect.
Clearly.
Yeah.
He talks about likely instances of gratuitous evil suffering that seems to serve no purpose, no greater good.
Does he give examples or categories?
He outlines 4 general causes of suffering in the world, relying on pain as a motivator, having general laws that don't bend for individuals, like gravity causing falls, nature being kind of stingy with abilities and resources, and things just being imperfectly made, natural disasters, diseases. And his point is, it seems plausible that an all-powerful benevolent being could have tweaked these conditions to drastically reduce suffering. The fact that the world is this way suggests the creator isn't perfectly good and all-powerful.
How does he deal with common responses, like God works in mysterious ways, we can't understand his plan?
He's very critical of that. Cleanthes argues, if you say God's goodness is totally different from human goodness, then the word good becomes meaningless when applied to God.
It empties the concept of content.
Exactly. And it destroys any basis for having a moral relationship with God. It's a dilemma. Either God's goodness is like ours, and then the problem of evil is a real problem, or it's totally alien, in which case God is unknowable and morally irrelevant to us.
And since Hume has already knocked down the other arguments for God.
Right. There's no independent reason left to just trust that there's a mysterious good reason for all the suffering. The appeal to mystery doesn't work without those other supports.
So given the mix of good and bad, order and chaos, what kind of designer, if any, does the evidence point to, according to Hume?
Philo suggests maybe an indifferent deity, or perhaps one that's morally neutral. Too much evil for perfect goodness, too much good for pure malice, maybe too much order for random chance or warring deities. Indifference seems to Philo like a possible fit for the mixed evidence.
Wow, okay. So a devastating critique of the justifications. But then he also looked at where religion comes from in the natural history. What's the story there?
Right, he shifts gears. Not is it true, but why do people believe it? He argues it didn't start with monotheism or reason. It started with polytheism.
Multiple gods, why?
Driven by ignorance and fear. Early humans didn't understand natural causes, storms, disease, etc., and they had this tendency to see agency, intention, behind powerful events. So they imagined various gods controlling these things, some helpful, some harmful.
Kind of personifying nature.
Exactly, in an animistic sort of view. Then, he thinks polytheism gradually morphed into monotheism.
Through philosophical reasoning?
Nope. Through emotions again. Fear and flattery. People trying to appease their favorite or most feared gods started praising them more and more extravagantly, attributing more and more power and perfection to them.
Until one god gets all the superlatives.
Pretty much. Leading to the idea of one single infinite God. But because this monotheism wasn't based on reason, Hume thought it was inherently unstable. People would constantly swing between this abstract, perfect God and more relatable, flawed, human-like conceptions.
He also talks about superstition and enthusiasm as problems within monotheism. What did he mean?
He saw them as corruptions, driven by the wrong emotions. Superstition comes from fear, ignorance, melancholy. It leads to complex rituals trying to appease angry or unknown forces, often controlled by priests. He pointed to Catholicism as an example.
Okay. And enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm comes from pride, hope, excessive adoration, and overactive imagination. It makes people feel they have direct, personal access to God, special insights, divine favor. He associated this more with some Protestant groups of his day.
So these are all false or vulgar religions in his view. Did he think there was any true religion?
He does mention a true religion or genuine theism. That seems to be a very minimal belief. Basically acknowledging some kind of intelligent cause or principle behind the order and regularity we see in nature.
Just acknowledging the order.
Yeah. And interestingly, for this view, miracles would actually count against it because they disrupt the natural order that points to this minimal intelligence.
So, very different from traditional views.
Very. In the dialogues, Philo describes it as believing that the cause or causes of order in the universe bear some remote analogy to human intelligence. Super vague, stripped of all the emotional anthropomorphic stuff.
But that sounds really detached. Does this true religion have any connection to morality or how we should live?
That's the key point. Hume and Philo argue it doesn't. This minimal theism is basically irrelevant to morality. It doesn't give us new duties, new motivations.
Unlike Cleanthes, who thought religion was the basis for morality.
Right. Hume and Philo disagree. Because this true religion offers no practical guidance, Philo even suggests the whole debate between this kind of theist and an atheist might be merely verbal, just a disagreement about words with no real consequence.
Wow, okay. And finally, Hume looked at the actual effects of religion in the world, didn't he? Especially popular religion.
Yes, as a historian and observer, he was very concerned about the negative consequences, the malefits as he called them. He saw so much conflict, intolerance, persecution fueled by religion.
Superstition versus enthusiasm again.
He saw enthusiasm as maybe more violent initially, but likely to burn out, whereas superstition was more persistent, often getting tangled up with political power, leading to ongoing oppression.
And monotheism itself.
He argued that monotheism, by its nature claiming one true God, tends towards intolerance. Unlike polytheism, which could often just add another god to the pantheon, monotheism tends to reject all rivals. His conclusion was pretty stark. Popular monotheism, historically, had done way more harm than good.
That's a heavy conclusion. So wrapping this up, it's this comprehensive critique undermining revelation through miracles, natural theology, through arguments like design and cosmology, highlighting the problem of evil, offering a natural explanation for beliefs' origins, and pointing out the negative consequences.
That's a great summary. And what's still so fascinating is that constant question about Hume himself. Was he, deep down a minimal deist, a cautious agnostic, or a closet atheist just avoiding the fallout?
Right, the ambiguity persists.
And also, why does religion persist so strongly even after critiques like Hume's? His own psychological account in The Natural History suggests maybe belief isn't always about rational argument, but about deeper human needs, fears, and tendencies.
Yeah, it really forces you to think about the foundations, doesn't it? Why people believe what they believe. Understanding Hume gives you such a powerful lens for examining those justifications, incredibly relevant for anyone curious about knowledge, belief, how ideas shape us. I bet some listeners had a few aha moments connecting Hume's points to modern debates or their own thinking. We covered a lot of ground, some dense philosophy.
We definitely did.
But hopefully, breaking it down like this gives everyone a clearer picture of Hume's thought on this huge topic.
So maybe the final thought for our listeners is this. Thinking about Hume's analysis, what strikes you today as the strongest reason for or against religious belief?
Or, flip it slightly, Hume focused a lot on the harms. Where might we see potential positives from religion today? Maybe community, meaning morality for some, and how do you think Hume might respond to those arguments, given his framework?
Definitely food for thought. Plenty to mull over from the great infidel.
The VirtualBooks publishing team thanks for your visit. If you liked our channel, please subscribe and share.